This is the first video on the SQL, and in this video I'm going to talk about the create statement, how one can create a tables in the SQL Server on the constraint. There are different type of constraint in the SQL, and I will be talking about the primary key constraint, unique key constraint, foreign key constraint, check, and default constraints. So constraints are nothing but you put a conditions on the table and verify whether the columns in the table should or must have this constraint or this behavior on the columns. So before I start with the constraint, let's create a database, or if we took the commands to create the database is very simple. You just have to use create database and tsql v6. You can give this name. I've already have created that. And if you want to drop the database, you can use drop database and the name of the database. To start and using creating the SQL statement, the one thing you always make sure you're using the correct database. So let's say I just move to master and want to use the T SQL v6. You just select and use T SQLs and put a semicolon, which is optional, but it's recommended. You put a semicolon after every statement in the SQL. And if you just execute, you can just click here, or you can press the F5. And you can see now the database has changed to TSQL. So what this means, whatever we do from now onwards, and it will be in the TSQL v6 database. So let's first create the table called employee. So table name, the syntax is create table name, and then you provide the columns. Columns syntax is the name of the column, then its data type, what kind of a data you want to store in that particular column, and some condition like not null. So this what is mean by not null here? It will not allow the null values in this particular columns. And if you want to allow nulls, you can mention null like here in the manager ID. So in this table, I have the employee ID, first name, last name, hire date, and as you can see, it's a data type, manager ID, SSN number, and salary. And salary has a different data type called money. This statement just check if any employee database or table is already there, it will automatically clean up. So if I just press F5 and sorry, and I can just now create the table. As table is created, we can go into the database check, or you can just simply run this select statement. Very simple. Select star from employees. Select. It's empty, but our table is there. Now let's move to the next, and the important part of this video is the constraints. Constraints, what do we mean by constraint? So let's say you have a table, and in the table there is a column. You don't want any, in that particular column, you don't want any duplicate values. So there is a different constraint you can use for that. For example, using the primary key. Primary key enforce that there will not be any duplicate value in that particular column. And if you try to add that duplicate value, it's going to throw an error. So the constraint enforce some conditions on the columns, and which is very helpful when you create multiples columns and put those constraint to enforce. Like I said, if you don't want the duplicate value, then it has to be the primary key. So what primary key do? It will uniqueness of the rows and disallow the null. So you cannot even have the null values in the primary key. And how to add the constraint? So in the same column employee, the syntax to add the constraint alter table means we are going to modify the structure of our table dbu employee, add constraint, and the name of the constraint, and then the primary key. So primary key on which column? Employee. So in this table, the employee column will not have any duplicate. can select this and press F5. So command run successfully. Now there is another constraint called unique, which is also enforce the uniqueness of the primary key, but only difference between the primary key and the unique is it allow the one null value. And why one? Because it only have one null value, and if you add another null value, it will be duplicate, and uh, that that part will not be as per the unique constraint. So you cannot have a two duplicate. Two nulls will not be. It will not be the null. Two null values, then again it's not unique, right? So only the one null value is allowed in the unique constraint, and the syntax is same. You alter the table, add the constraint name, and on which column, right? Unique is the keyword to add the unique constraint. So if I run this now, what happens when you create the unique constraint? So what it does, it create an index in and what that index means, it is also be very useful when you fetch the data using select statement. So the column which has the indexion done, they perform very fast. Your data retrieval is going to be in less time, and again it will be very useful if you have a large data and you have an indexing done. So in the backside of the SQL engine, all these unique and primary constraint are going to create the indexing, and this will help you in the query performance. And also it's going to enforce its property of uniqueness, or in the case of primary, no nulls as well. The third one is the foreign key constraint. What is mean by foreign key? So when you have a two tables and you are using the primary key of another table, means that is foreign to its table, that is the foreign key. So what is used is it enforce the referential integrity. What do you mean by referential integrity? Means, let's say you have a order ID, and order ID is the foreign key in, let's say, in product, right? So you cannot you can only have those order IDs or the product IDs which are there in the other table as the primary key. So it's a foreign key is nothing but the primary key. We are using primary key of some different table. Let's create another table and we are going to add the foreign key. So in this, let's drop the DB orders if there is any, and we are going to create a new table. DB is nothing but database object orders. It has these columns, and as you can see, we are adding the primary key on the order ID, right? Now we are going to alter the for to add the foreign key. We are going to alter the structure of the table DB orders. Add the foreign key using the employee ID. So employee ID, if you remember, it's a primary key in the employee table, and we are adding this the foreign key in the DB orders. Let me select, press F5, done. You can also add the foreign key within the same table. Let's say in the employee table, you want to add manager ID as the foreign key. You can do that. The syntax is alter table DBO employees, add constraint, the constraint name on which table, foreign key, manager ID, and referential, it is going to refer the employee ID. Let me open this. Run. No action referential action means any attempt to delete the row from the reference table will be rejected if related row exists in the reference table. What do you mean by that? Let's say you want to delete a row from the employee table when there are row in the order tables. You see, because those are two linked, you cannot delete the rows in the employee table because that's been referred in the order table. And it's uh, if you're trying to do that, your error going to be thrown by the SQL engine saying you cannot do that. You are violating the referential integrity of the table. There are other two constraints. The check constraint, let's say you want to because salary cannot be negative, it has to be from more than 0. You can put a check constraint on the table. Any value in the salary has to be greater than 0. And the syntax is same. We are changing definition of a table employee, add constraint, name of a constraint, check salary on the on the salary column greater than 0, like this. And default constraint, the last one, is nothing but, let's say you want a default value. Default value is what? Let's say there are two columns, name or the order ID and the date, right? And you don't want to enter date every time. So you want a default value. Means if you are not entering any value, the system, the table should have some default value there. For that, you can just put a default constraint, like in this example, alter table on the orders, add constraint, the name of the constraint, default. On default value will be for the order ID successfully. So the thing which we talked about is how to create the table syntax and the constraint. So what are the different type of constraint? The primary key, which is the unique without null, unique constraint, primary key with null, foreign constraint, which use the primary key of the other table, default constraint, and the check constraint. And let's to do cleanup, let's drop table, both the table whichever you have created. You just run this command. Thank you.